He says the signature that she showed me isn't even close to her signature. So who could have forged them? Look at the chain of title. That's why these papers are important. Not just the most recent thing recorded at the county registers, because frankly, I'm not sure you can trust the county register of deeds and all the records. We're finding all over the country there's so much forgery and false records being laid down. Even though they're stamped, they're stamping a forged document. And then someone else, if they're contested, goes into court with a forged document. The fraud is massive. Somebody needs to investigate. Let's take a look at the wedding picture again of Randy and Evie when they were young, way back, many years ago. There they are, just married, all happy and smiley. Well, they're still married and they're still relatively happy, but they're not smiling because they've been defrauded. Now, what Marie McDonald brought up was the fact that the house was sold at a price that was double its actual value and then later sold for much less. Why doesn't Bill Brown look into this? Because he knows probably little or nothing about real estate. That's why Bill Brown needs to get some new people, not the old crooks, but some new people in the sheriff's department to create an investigative squad and get somebody who's honest, if you can find one, in the Santa Barbara District Attorney's office, filled with crooks since Tom Snedden was there 25 years, and then Christine Stanley, who covered up, made sure that Snedden didn't get arrested because Snedden should have gone, I'm sorry, I just got to say this. Thomas W. Snedden, Jr., the district attorney, should have gone to prison. Probably he's in a very hot place right now, wishing someone would throw some water down in hell for him. But what he did to Michael Jackson was just disgusting. And it looks like a pattern in practice in Santa Barbara with these multi-million-dollar homes. What's going on here? What are these people up to? I don't know if it can ever be cleaned up, but someone needs to pay. And I got a question for you, Sheriff Bill Brown. If the warrant's only about a trespass and there was no intent to trespass because they honestly believed it was their home, they still had keys to the guest house that worked, and they say they didn't break any mirror, regardless of whether it was a $1,000 mirror or a $7,000, why not drop the warrant and start investigating, and maybe you'll find out the current occupant and the Quaids have both been victims, as well as the title insurance company that's going to find out they're going to have to pay out big time. But then there's an issue. Since this warrant got the Quaids arrested at least 4 times, and the Quaids have got a Canadian judge to try to get the evidence against them for which they wanted them extradited back to Santa Barbara, and Santa Barbara wouldn't give them the evidence. So a Canadian judge said, this is crap. You people go out of my courtroom, go free. So they went back into Vermont. And again, they tried to grab them with a warrant. And a Vermont judge said, okay, Santa Barbara, show us the evidence. And there was no evidence put forth. And then a letter came out of Indiana saying, show us the, and Santa Barbara won't show the evidence. It's beginning to look to me like the Santa Barbara, or some people in the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Department, as well as the District Attorney's Department, are intentionally keeping the Quaids at arm's length. So the fraud on the court, the fraud on the records, the fraudulent loans and sale of the property, which the Quaids say they didn't agree to sell. They didn't even know the property had been sold. They thought they still owned the home. It looks like all this is being done to keep the Quaids away so they can't come back and fight honestly. They don't want to go back into jail, and they shouldn't have to. So why not just drop the silly warrant? I mean, remember, this is the county where they had a multi-million-dollar arrest warrant for Michael Jackson, and he voluntarily turned himself in, put up an all-cash bond, millions of dollars in cash. And then the jury said, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty. Bam! To the district attorney's office. Crooked bunch of thieves, thugs, and scum of the Bar Association. Tom Mesereau and Susan Yu really put them down, and they deserved it because they were crooks. And Ron Zonen should have been indicted, and Auchincloss, Gordy Auchincloss should have been indicted, Ron Zonen should have been indicted, as well as Tom Sneddon. And Ron and Gordy are still alive. They could still be indicted, in my opinion, for fraud on the court. They should have known these witnesses were lying through their teeth while they're trying to make a settlement through the back door to drop the charges criminally if you give me a couple $1 million. And this time, Michael Jackson stood his ground. Well, Evie and Randy are not used to sitting in jails. So it looks to me like the Sheriff's Department and the District Attorney's Department are in on this. Let's take a quick look at this picture. What do you think Randy's thinking today? He's thinking ABC didn't really cover this story, NBC didn't cover this story. Even the Santa Barbara News Press didn't really cover this story the way William Wagener is. Now, I'm not saying I'm doing a great job. I'm just saying I'm at least bringing the issue up. Let's look at the paperwork. Let's have some real experts, some forensic experts, signature experts, and let's find out who really signed the documents. Because Quaid said they didn't sign anything to sell anything. They thought they had purchased a home. So why can't Sheriff Bill Brown pull together an expert team to look at it? If you don't have one, then you should hire someone from outside and stop trusting the district attorneys. I know you got to work with them, but remember, the elected DA, Sneddon, did not only to Michael Jackson. Remember when Michael Jackson was arrested, he said, and there were other unindicted defendants. Well, we never heard about any indictments to any of the other unindicted defendants. They just wanted to destroy Michael Jackson, a good man who gave more money to children's charities than all the other people put together. Millions upon millions. Nobody can even calculate how many millions. Shame on my county of Santa Barbara. Shame on the district attorney's office. I'm still waiting for a callback from the DA, though I do have to thank Chris Gottschalk. He did at least call me back and acknowledge that he was aware that I'm trying to look at the evidence. I don't think they have any real evidence. Is a fingerprints of either of the Quaids on any broken glass from a mirror? Do they have anything other than stuff that belongs to the Quaids in the lockup locker? I don't know. They won't show it. They just want the Quaids to come back and get arrested again. Meanwhile, the Quaids have lost probably in excess of $1 million a year for Randy not working. Because you can't work if you got a warrant out for your arrest and they know what film set you're on. So figure about 10 years, $1 million a year, $10 million probably owed to the Quaids if they sue for wrongful persecution. I think that's the real reason the sheriffs and the DA will not look at this as a white-collar crime by somebody else who had access to the signatures. Not the Quaids, not the Zarickis, probably not the real estate agent, probably not the title officer, probably not the escrow officer, but somebody else who signed contracts with Randy Quaid had access to his signature. Who would have had access to his signature? Who would have had access to those contracts? Time to get off your butt, Bill Brown. Get an expert forensic team going on this. That's William Wagener's thought. Now, if we had a DA like the DA I'm going to show you, I think this thing would have been over way back. In the first few months the warrant was put out, it would have been recalled. And the people that did the wrong thing. Let's watch this. You ready to roll it? Ready. Let's roll it. This is a really good district attorney. His name is Norm Verroman. We got Susan Massini's picture there. She was the one he beat. She had been in office 12 years. One picture's missing. And here's all the DAs going back years and years. Norm Verroman has a historical perspective, and he carries it right into the DA's office. And here we are walking into Norm Verroman's office.
The case proceeds, and it's still a DA's case. So he says quite often the DA ends up prosecuting before the refusals decide. So if that happens here, I may want
plus some other stuff back. This guy was charged with a 245 and use of that gun.
What, did that last picture you saw, that was Norm Verroman. He was on a lawyer magazine. He was a cover shot. You saw him holding his shotgun there. He gives instruction on the use of handguns at the rifle range. He's also a cripple, and he's not ashamed of being a cripple. He's had both shoulder joints replaced, and he has a copy of one sitting on his desk. If you watch careful, when we go back to the interview, you might see this funny little thing. It's a little silver thing with a round bottom on the corner of the desk. And that's what he's got sitting in his shoulders. But it doesn't stop him from being a very astute district attorney. We go on with the interview with Norm Verroman in Mendocino County, just for you people who couldn't go there.
Don't break the camera. Yes, beautiful, thank you.
I called Melissa and she wasn't here.
Yeah, both Colleen and Melissa are off today.
Oh.
Thank you.
Okay, this is William Wagener in the district attorney's office in Mendocino County with Norm Verroman, second-term Libertarian district attorney here in Mendocino County. Is that right, Norm?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, I have permission to tape this and air this on television?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
If you can find anybody who wants to watch it.
Again, this is William Wagener, the guy in the white hat. I'm really here. We're in Mendocino County with Norm Verroman. Norm, you said you're tired of talking about the marijuana issue. Is that because it's a low priority or what?
Well, it's a non-issue. I mean, it's a medical thing. The people of the state of California approve marijuana for people that have a medical need for it. And of course, the big hue and cry now is that it's being abused, that there are people using it that don't have a medical need. Now, I said, yes, that's true. But there's a lot more people now that can use it without fear of being arrested. So the abuses are de minimis compared to the good that it's caused. So it's time to move on to something else, and the whole problem could be solved anyway if Congress would take it out of a Class A drug situation.
And make it a prescription drug?
Mm-hmm.
So that would be an easy fix.
Oh, yeah.
Would that make your job easier?
Oh, yes, infinitely easier. Because now, you know, the Ashcroft is going crazy trying to take people's rights away from them. I don't know where that's going to end, but he's threatening to take doctors' licenses away from them, even though they just recommended them. So it's got them all scared again.
And in your priorities, you got so much crime going on in your county, marijuana is probably one of the least. If it's a nonviolent possession, that's the least of the things you want to take time to prosecute.
My priorities are crimes against people. And
crimes against people.
And property.
And property.
If we have time left over after we take care of that, yeah, we'll do something like the victimless crimes. But
so you take care of the rape, the assault,
all those things are high priority.
The violent, and marijuana is like the lowest priority.
Right.
If you get around to it.
Right.
How about the sheriff? Does he agree with you on that?
Oh yeah, we started the program. We're the first county in the state that had a pre-identification program.
To identify medical marijuana.
Identify medical marijuana users, and they could come in and register with the sheriff's office, and they give them a card that said, yeah, we're a legitimate marijuana user. And that made it easier on the officer in the street. If he found them with marijuana, he said, here's my card. Oh, okay, goodbye.
Interesting. Well, what happens if a federal agent comes in at the same time the police officer is saying, okay, you can go, and the federal agent's there and saying, no, you're under arrest?
Well, technically, the federal agent could arrest them, but That's not happening.
It's not happening.
They don't have the staff or the personnel to do that. They're just taking on a high-profile case.
I see. Could the sheriff's office, who's your sheriff in Mendocino County?
Where?
Who is it?
Tony Kramer.
Tony Craver. Could Tony Craver arrest a federal agent if he was violating a California law in prosecuting a medical marijuana user?
I suppose technically he could, but that causes a big mess. And basically, they're not paying any attention to us up here. The feds are not paying any attention to us because they know it's a problem they can't solve.
Can I shut this door because I think we're picking up a lot of background.
No problem.
So the feds are basically leaving you alone because they got bigger fish to fry.
Yeah, they got other stuff to do. They got terrorists to look for.
There's a good subject. Getting a terrorist, it's getting impossible. I remember 30 years ago carrying a gun with me on a plane, flying down to Florida because I didn't know what kind of neighborhood I was going to be sleeping in that night. And it was no problem. I put the gun in my pocket, got on the plane, got off the plane. Oh, maybe it was more than 30 years. It might have been
Probably 40 years ago.
probably 40 years. I'm getting older. And it wasn't a problem. But it seems ever since they've made it a problem, it's getting harder and harder to fly. Do you think this is going to be bad for gun owners? Just this whole terrorist
if
thing?
you just take a look at the legislation, there seems to be a concerted effort to take guns away from law-abiding citizens. Now, they're just doing it a little nibbles here and there, but the end result is the same. Every day you wake up and you got another law that says, well, you can't do this or you can't do that. But the fallacy of the whole situation is only law-abiding citizens obey the law. And the crooks don't care how many laws there are about guns. They've got them and they're going to use them. In fact, they're very happy to see more gun laws because that means it makes their job easier. Because the law-abiding citizen is going to be unarmed and going to be prey for them.
What can you and Sheriff Craven do when they come down with another stupid federal law on guns? Do you ignore it? Do you put conditions on the enforcement of it in your county? What practically can you do as district attorney?
Well, it's not just the feds. The state comes down with the laws too. But the thing that most people don't understand is that the district attorney of each county is the one that decides what laws get enforced and what ones don't. Because we have to set priorities. We can't prosecute everybody for every crime that's broken, every law that's broken. So the priorities are set by your local district attorneys. And of course, the DA and the criminal justice system is the most powerful person, and because I decide, I get a report across my desk, I end up being the judge, the jury, the defense attorney, the probation department, everything, by saying, well, we're going to file this or we're not going to file it. So if it doesn't get filed, no judge ever gets a chance to look at it. The judges only get the cases that the district attorney says, yeah, this is something I want to prosecute. My charge in the California Constitution is that I'm charged with investigating and prosecuting crime. It's basically a one-sentence charge.
So supposing the state legislature passed a bill that said all guns not in the possession of law enforcement officers are now illegal, and the sheriffs and DAs are to go out, confiscate the guns, arrest the people who possess them, and prosecute them. Now, of course, there'd probably be a legal challenge to that. But in the interim, between the law being passed and the challenge, what would your policy be?
Well, that wouldn't happen in my country.
So there wouldn't be
If the law, the way you described it, if they outlawed all guns that only law enforcement could have, I'd never enforce that.
You would not enforce that law. You
No,
just
it's illegal. It's unconstitutional, and I don't need a court to tell me it's unconstitutional.
okay. So you don't need the court to tell you. You just don't prosecute that law.
I won't prosecute it.
What if the federal agents came in to enforce that
They
law?
can do anything they want, but they've got to get cooperation from us, and I don't think they get much cooperation from us.
Okay, that's a straight answer. You're unique in another way. If I can go back to your personal life, you're married,
Yes?
and I think before you're married, you decided you didn't need to pay the income tax. That no law compelled you
Well,
to pay.
I decided that after researching it, there was no law that required me to file an income tax return. And that's,
And you ended up in front of a judge who was an IRS judge in a
Well-
special tax court?
No, it was in the United States District
Oh, it
Court,
was
San
in-
Francisco.
San Francisco District Court.
Yes.
And the judge didn't see it your way. He said what?
No, he didn't.
And he said what? The Constitution has no place in...
That's right. I said the Constitution, and it says that you're supposed to tell me what I'm charged with, and I want you to tell me what law it is I've broken. He says, I think you know what law it is you've broken. And I said, no, I don't. And you're supposed to tell me. You're supposed to give me the scripture and verse. The section they charged me was 7203 of the Internal Revenue Code, which says everyone who is required by this code to file a return and doesn't is guilty of a misdemeanor. And I said, okay, all I'm asking you to do is show me where in the code that I'm required to file a return.
Right.
We don't have to do that, is the answer I got. And I said, what about the Constitution? Constitution doesn't apply to this. And I said, is that so? I knew I was on a downhill slide.
Yeah. From there it got ugly.
Oh, yeah.
So then he put you for contempt of court.
No one ever for contempt of court.
Well, what did he put you in jail for?
Well, the jury trial went on, and they found me guilty of 5 counts of failing to file an income tax.
Failing to file an income tax.
So he gave me a sentence of 18 months.
And what year was that? What year was that?
1991.
Okay, now you did about half that time or a little more than half?
Well, I went to jail on January 7th, 1992, and I got out on, went to jail on April 7th, 1992, got out January 7th, 1993. I served, 9 months of that.
That court left an impression on you, didn't it?
Oh, yeah, you don't get locked up and not have an impression on you. I mean, it certainly puts a kink in your ability to move around, and I was, in that 9 months, I was in about 6 different federal prisons, which is highly unusual. They put me first out at Boron, and then I got valley fever out there, and they misdiagnosed it, and I almost died. I was in the hospital at Victorville for 3 weeks. They kept treating me for pneumonia and complaining that I was malingering because I wasn't getting well. And of course it was, valley fever is a fungus, and they kept treating me for a bacterial infection and giving me antibiotics, and it didn't do any good. So I finally survived that, and then they sent me back to the Federal Medical Center at Rochester, Minnesota, which is a maximum security lockdown place. I was there with Jimmy Baker and Lyndon LaRouche and a whole bunch of people, a lot of mafioso, Joey the Dove.
You were in there with Joey the Dove?
Oh yeah, Joseph Iupa.
Did you get to talk to him?
Oh sure, we used to walk the yard together.
Where's Joey today?
He must be dead by now because he was in his 80s 10 years ago.
Oh yeah, he'd be really old.
He'd be really old. But he was a very interesting fellow. Had a lot of the mafia there. I met the head of the Rhode Island, Ray Patriarca was in there. Bunch of interesting people.
Did they tell you that they had good relations with district attorneys in different...
I wasn't a district attorney there.
No, but did they ever tell you about the relationships with DAs and...
No, they just told me what a farce the whole system was. That they were breaking the law, but they knew they were breaking the law. But they had more integrity and honesty than the federal government did, as far as I was concerned.
That's interesting that you would say they said that, because there's an ATF agent on a documentary film said the same thing about what happened in Waco. He said the people they killed there had more integrity than the bosses that ordered them to kill the people in Waco. And it's sort of a sad comment on who's running our government these days. Excuse me. So you came out, and did you have your mind made up to run for DA then?
Oh, no. When I came out, I was still sick. I was still recovering from that valley fever. It took me 3 or 4 years to get over that stuff. It's an airborne fungus that lands in your lungs, and I think that the year I got it, they had about 45 or 50 cases out of that area, and over 30 of the people died from it. So I figured I was pretty lucky that I didn't die. When I got out in '93, we went to
Yes, go ahead.
the main Salmon River in Idaho and ran a guest ranch for 2.5 years. So I was kind of dropped out of the circuit. And then we came back here in 1995, and I went back into practicing law, and '97, I decided they needed a new DA, so I ran in the '98 election and won.
Now, you beat Susan Assini, who had been DA for 12 years, is that right?
That's correct.
And she had a reputation for being a little bit vicious towards non-custodial parents, or just inept in general.
I think it was more just inept in general. You know, when anybody stays in office that long, either they're doing a very good job or they're bored to death, and she was bored to death.
So now she's over at Child Support Services prosecuting
She's doing it civilly, not criminally.
civilly.
Yeah, they take people to court that haven't paid their court-ordered payments, so.
Now, are you glad that the DA's office no longer has the child support?
Well, let's put it this way. When we had it, during a week, more than 75% of the calls I got from the citizens that were irate had to do with child support payments, not with the criminal aspect of my office. So once I got rid of that, I thought I was in heaven.
That makes sense. 70% reduction in phone volume. Were most of those calls, by the way, were those mainly custodial parents demanding to get the payments, or were some of them non-custodial?
It was people saying they weren't getting the money, and the other people calling saying, hey, I sent the money in and they're not giving me credit for it. So I was getting them from both sides.
And what could you do about that?
I'd turn it over to the staff and say, hey, fix this. And sometimes, more often than not, it was our fault because it's a cumbersome program. And they depend on computers, and the computers were not up to date, and it was just a big mess.
It was a mess, but it was mainly the county's fault for not getting the payments notified that they were received and didn't get transferred?
Yeah, I don't know whose fault it was, but it was, the system wasn't working.
The system wasn't working?
No, and it still isn't working. They thought by taking it away from the DAs they'd make it better, and I can tell you right now the rate of collections has gone down steadily since I don't have anything more to do with it. Every year that they've had it over there now, the rate has gone down. Maybe 2-3% a year, nothing gigantic, but at least it's not going up, and it's not even maintaining.
Now, on some of those calls, when the non-custodial parent would call and say, hey, I sent the payment, I paid it, I didn't get credit, did some of those turn out to be true?
Yes, certainly.
Most of them turn out to be true?
I don't know how many were true, because I'd turn them over to somebody over there to deal with. And every once in a while they call me back and says, yeah, we screwed up. But it's a human system, you know, humans are not perfect. That's why they're still putting razors on the ends of pencils.
Did anybody ever postulate a program of giving equal placement, equal custody to the children, and having no child support transfers, but they each pay their bills in the 6 months of the year or the 1 year that they have?
You know, I don't know. That's something
policy.
entirely out of my realm of influence. That has to do with family law. And I don't like dealing with family law, so I don't.
Okay.
Criminal law is much cleaner and neater than this.
Now, how many serious crimes have you prosecuted since you've been DA here, like murder, attempted murder?
Well, we handle somewhere between 6,000 and 8,000 cases a year.
Criminal, real pure criminal cases?
Well, a percentage of those, we probably handle 1,000 to 1,200 felonies, and the balance are misdemeanors or traffic infractions. So we handle, right now we have 8 or 10 murders going. We always have 8 to 10 homicides in the system somewhere.
In Little Mendocino County, you got 10 homicides going.
Oh.
How many investigators do you have?
That I have in my office?
Yes.
I have 7.
You have 7 investigators. And how many do the sheriffs?
Well, the sheriff, I've got the sheriff's department, and I've got 3 municipal police departments. I've got the city of Ukiah, I've got city of Fort Bragg, and the city of Willis. They all have their own investigators, and the sheriff, of course, has his investigators. And then I also have the highway patrol, all on fish and game and alcoholic beverage control. They all submit cases to me.
I see. Okay. Now, you used to teach, or you still teach rifle safety at the rifle?
Actually, I teach handgun.
You teach handgun safety?
The law now says that you have to have a course in handgun law and safety before you can get a permit to carry a concealed weapon. And I teach that class, and I have for a number of years. And in this county, we've run probably 1,200 people through that class, and we have about 1,100 and some permits issued by the sheriff.
And happy birthday, Sheriff William Wagener. Right there, you see him. And he put on his fancy duds because he'd been elected sheriff in 1874, I believe, in Door County, Wisconsin. A Civil War veteran who had been wounded in the leg and walked with a little bit of a limp. And he died of gangrene from a gunshot wound 3 years into his role as sheriff of Door County, Wisconsin, where I was born, from his grandson, Captain Nick Wagener, whose father was Dr. Nicholas Z. Wagener. And there's a lot of Wagners around because Sheriff William Wagener had strong seed. And God bless him. A good man. He would not have tolerated this white-collar crime we have going here. He had a reputation for being kind of a tough sheriff, and guys would get drunk in a bar and get out of control and start assaulting people. He'd walk in, deliver a quarter barrel of beer to the tavern over and grab the drunk, snap him like that to get his attention, pick him up off the ground. He was 6'4". Back in the 1870s when the average man was about 5'6", he was 6'4". He'd grab the drunk, pick him off the ground like that, give him a good shake by the back of the collar. And unfortunately, it's rumored that one time he snapped a guy's neck because he was really out of control. Not the kind of sheriff you wanted to mess with. My great-granddaddy, Sheriff William Wagener. Happy birthday. 181 years ago, he was born in Grove on the Moselle River in Germany. William Wagener became Sheriff of Door County, even though he had a little bit of a limp from a Civil War wound carrying the colors at Lookout Mountain. So, knowing that doesn't mean much to most of you, but I can tell you his blood runs in my veins. Sheriff Bill Brown, you need to get on this Quaid case. As I see it, there is another party here. The Quaids didn't commit trespass. They didn't break anybody's mirror. I don't know how it got broken, but it appears I would take the Quaid's word for that, and I would take the Turicki's word that they believe someone had trespassed on their property. But it may have been someone else that broke the mirror and not them. Or maybe there really wasn't a broken mirror. I don't know. They won't show the evidence. They wouldn't show it to a Canadian court. I'm talking about the Santa Barbara sheriff and the Santa Barbara district attorneys. They wouldn't show it to a Canadian judge. They wouldn't show the evidence to a Vermont judge. And apparently, even though a letter came from an attorney in Indiana, they wouldn't show it to anybody in Indiana. Do you have any evidence against a Quaids, or is this just part of a scam to keep them far away so they can't come and fight for their stolen property and sue the proper people? Let you think about that a little bit. I'm William Wagener here on the 19th of October in 2018, still looking to see if we the people who ordained this new Constitution in order to make a more perfect union can take control back. Now, a lot of people are going to ask you to vote for them in less than a month. My advice is don't vote for anybody who's the judge. Don't reelect them. We need a clean house. Get rid of incumbents, especially Carbajal. You know, Santa Maria Times loses all credibility when they put one guy's face on a page and then pretty much ignore the other guy. But that's the Santa Barbara News Press is not different. Santa Maria Times, Lompoc, whatever. You know, do it fairly. That's why I don't read the Santa Maria Times. That's why I do my own show. With that said, I want to take you to an expert on fraud in the documents. We had her on the show here, live in the studio, and she was sitting right about where I am here, or maybe right about here. Her name is Candace Jones. Candace, we need to hear from you. Tell us again. Candace Jones, tell us what you got.
First off, I'm a retired banker. I'm not proud to say that today. Can you hear me? I'm not proud to say that today. I was for years, up until the 90s, since I started in the 70s. And I personally have read the National Mortgage Settlement. I've read the TARP program. I read the DOJ. And one thing I could tell immediately when I read this, and Camilla Harris, I can tell that you didn't write this. I can tell that you probably had a few words in it, but the rest of it was written by the banks. One thing you can always be sure of with a bank is that they will promise you the moon, and in the end, they'll take it back. They have wonderful little words they love to slip in, and if anyone ever read the TARP, you could know that it was only suggested that they do modification for these people. Now, first off, I don't believe in these modifications because it's modifying fraud, just as Renee said. These documents are fraudulent in everything I've seen. Over the last 3 years, I've probably worked with about 100 different people, friends that have come to me, because after I retired, they knew how long I'd been in the business. They knew also that I was an expert with the FDIC, and also I was with the Resolution Trust that took down the savings and loans. So, Camilla, I have to tell you right up front, honey, I think you sold us out. I think you sold out California. And your citizens deserve much better than that. You're not the only Attorney General that did it. All the rest of them did it with the exception of Snyderman. And we can be thankful at least one person or a couple there held out. But I truly am ashamed to say you're our Attorney General. One thing I want to tell you is that you started the moderator for the Attorney General. You're quite proud of that came out of the National Mortgage Settlement. Well, let me tell you how that's working out for the people. Because, like I said, I've helped a few people. And I have spoken with your moderators. And they are truly just spokesmen for the banks, okay? They don't know what they're doing. Most of the people at the banks don't know what they're doing. I deal with corporate, and I know when they're lying to me. And I want to tell you just a couple of real quick stories. One of them is a widow, okay, with 2 children that are special needs children. She has a sister that is in the 4th stage of cancer. We worked with Wells Fargo on a loan modification because she didn't have the courage or the stamina for a lawsuit. So we worked for 3 years with Wells Fargo. After 3 years, 1,060 documents faxed to the bank, 147 phone calls to the bank. In the end, they said that it's not in the investor's best interest to modify this loan. Okay, now she's in a lawsuit. We're backing her up every way we can. I've documented these calls. In the meantime, before they denied her, I was working with your moderator. And let me tell you what the moderator said. There's not really anything we can do to help you. And I asked one of your people at the moderator, I said, here's what I want. I want a copy of the pooling and servicing agreement. If this woman's in a supposed trust, which there again, the bank doesn't know who her investor is, because I've received 2 letters from Wells Fargo. One letter states it's U.S. Bank. The other letter states that it was Goldman Sachs. They don't know because it's not with an investor. Okay, these trusts closed. They're no longer trading on SEC. They already have closed these trusts. Investors have taken the tax write-off from the IRS. These things have been bought back. Okay, and whenever you call the bank, the first thing they say to you, we are a debt collector. These are people that have bought up bad credit card debt, unsecured debt, that are now pretending to be a lender,
That's
saying,
exactly.
That
is exactly.
well, they
Say
are.
that one again.
They are pretending to be your lender when they are, in fact, a debt collector. I always had the phrase that I called debt collectors the little mafia, because they just come at you with both guns. And they don't have anything to come after. It's an unsecured debt that they're coming after you, and they're modifying. When, in fact, they do, after a couple of years, modify these loans, they put in the document, you cannot come back at us and sue us for anything wrongdoing in the past. Okay, first off, that's illegal too, to take away your legal rights to sue them. But it's in every loan modification packet. And just to show you an example, here's a banker box full of this one woman's file that is now in a lawsuit with the bank. So These are the 1,060 documents that I personally, being a banker, faxed in that they claim they never got. I have another gentleman, Bank of America, all of them are in it. Bank of America simply said after 10 submissions by this gentleman, now keep in mind the bank does get back $1,500 from your settlement, Camilla, every time they offer to help the people. So why do they want you to submit 10 times? That's $1,500 a pop. After the 10th time and working with your moderator again, explaining to him that Bank of America came back and said, you are declined for this modification because we do not have contractual authority from the investor. There again, they don't know who the investor is. So I thought, okay, if you say this is Wells Fargo's the investor, I'll write Wells Fargo. I did write them. Wells Fargo came back and said it's against our contractual authority to tell them if they can modify or not. We don't care. I took these 2 letters and sent them to your moderator, who came back and told the homeowner, I'm sorry, we really just can't help you, and I cannot get you the PSA to prove it because the trust is not even trading anymore. But, you know, you can do a deed in lieu of, or you can do a short sale. And I explained to him that he'd been there for 30 years, and yes, he will get something done on this home if I have to keep him there another 30 years. So after that, they were so upset with me at B of A, and they do like to hang up on me. They don't like, I think they've got my number down, but they sold him off. And another thing they did to you, Camilla, in your national mortgage settlement, you put all these restrictions, okay, even though with their little loopholes in there. But what did they do? B of A sold them all off to Nation Star. Wells Fargo sold theirs off. Now they're with SLS, SPS, all these other little debt collectors. So they got out from under your settlement totally. They gave you money to help the people. You set up a group of bureaucracy out here to help the people. And what do they tell me? I'm sorry, we can't help the people. So yeah, I am very disappointed in what's going on. The documents, like they were talking about with Marina, I looked at all 500 of the documents that she used in that audit, and all 500 were fraudulent. Out of the 100 people that have come to me, I've looked at their documents. All of them should be suing the banks. All of them should come back and sue you for not doing what you should have done with your
Dan,
job.
we will. Amen. We will. Wonderful, Candace. Thank you very much for all you're doing.
Thank you. Okay, that is Candace. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Candace Jones for reminding us so much fraud. Now, that black gal you saw behind Candace, that was Mrs. Rozier, who used to be the #2 expert in a certain Navy missile program. Because of the criminals running the justice system, had nothing to do with her job, had to do with her husband's house. Last time I talked to her, she's now living in Africa to be free from the criminals involved in the fraud and scams of foreclosures. But Candace used to work at the corporate level of B of A. And she's telling you, you don't have to believe me, believe Candace. She worked at the corporate level, and she knows when they're BSing you. By the way, that DA I showed you, Norm Vroman, first and to this date, even though he's dead now, the only libertarian district attorney, and that was way back in '03. He was allowing marijuana use in Mendocino County when all the rest of the state was still harassing people. It's a medicine, people. Anyway, thank you for watching. I appreciate it. I know there's a lot of other interesting channels you could be on, but I try to bring you some scoops, and this was right at home here in Santa Barbara. Go see Powers versus the Crooked Bank Gangsters on YouTube. Here's what Tom Mesereau had to say on my show. Remember I called the Jackson case right when all the media was saying, oh, he's going to jail, he's going. I said, no, he's going home free. And I had Mesereau on my show 5 years later. I'm saying the Quaids are going to come out on top, and maybe the Zarikis too. They may both be victims. Why isn't Bill Brown investigating? Here we go. Thanks for watching tonight. I'm William Wagener for On Second Thought.
The jury found him not guilty 14 times.
They knew he was innocent by that time.
Absolutely. I
They
mean,
knew.
this case was a travesty as far as I'm concerned. An absolute injustice to put Michael Jackson through this horrible, horrible process with evidence like that, in my opinion, was a travesty.
Am I going too far when I say this was an inquisition of a talented young black man that was living in a white community?
I don't think so. I mean, you look, was racism the origin of this? I don't know. Could it easily have been? It could have been. I don't know. I do know that the district attorney of Santa Barbara County apparently focused on Mr. Jackson in the early 90s, specifically 1993. He conducted an investigation. He launched a grand jury probe in Santa Barbara and instigated a grand jury probe in Los Angeles. So in the early 90s, you had 2 grand juries investigating Michael Jackson, and neither one charged him with anything. Then in the mid-90s, based on information I received, apparently the district attorney traveled to Australia and Canada looking for alleged victims of Michael Jackson, and from what I'm told, couldn't find any. There was a website at the sheriff's department in this county looking for information about Michael Jackson. And finally, a 3rd grand jury was convened in, I believe it was 2003, 2004, actually 2004, that did indict him on 10 felony counts. And that's what started the process that resulted in the trial of 2005.
Well, I thought at least he was maybe guilty of giving some wine, but I had the pleasure, after the trial had been over for, I don't know, a year or 2, of seeing at a bar association meeting in Santa Barbara when Christina Stanley, the late Christina Stanley, was making her announcement she was running to replace Tom Sneddon. And Gordon Auchincloss turned to me after I said something to somebody. He said, well, don't you really think Michael is guilty? And I said to him, and it gave me a little pleasure. I said, Mr. Auchincloss, you prosecutors proved to me he was innocent of everything. With your lying witnesses that get caught, your bogus fingerprint evidence. And I started to go into this fingerprint evidence, and to me, nothing sticks in my mind so greatly is that day you put the little pointer pen light laser up on the calendar of the Barely Legal magazine after you had got Gavin at least 7, 8 times to say, yes, Michael gave me that magazine in the bed, and yes, I'd last been at Neverland and such a month. I forget, it was January, February, or March. And the date on it was October. And you made Gavin read the date. And then you asked him again, now when were you last at Neverland? And you say he gave you this words. Didn't that make a striking impression? I looked at the jury and they were like, the front row was going like rolling their eyes like, oh my God, can we do any, why is this going on? I mean, the jurors were rolling their eyes. How soon before that did you know? I mean, you must have been laying that trap for him. How soon before the trial started did you know that Tom Sneddon had physically given the magazine, the physical magazine, with no gloves on, and given it to Gavin Avizio in the grand jury indictment proceeding? How soon before that did you know?
Well, my law firm partner and co-counsel, Susan Yu, she was the one that I worked through all the evidence with. We were the lead counsel in the case. Randy and Michael Jackson asked me to come to Florida, said they wanted Susan Yu and me to